Hello, Compassion Ambassadors. Thank you so much for tuning in to yourself and with us for this chat about how we can use food as medicine and how food can become our best friend instead of our enemy, even when we have to make major dietary changes, as I've been having to do. So, this is my dear friend and soul sister, Torea. Torea, can you give us a little bit about your background and
Sure. Yeah. So I guess I got into this whole healing thing because in 2009, I was diagnosed with Hashimoto's and Raynaud's. And that kind of started me down the path of learning about autoimmune disease and found myself falling in love with the science of it. And with my background being in biochemistry, I kind of came full circle from a different career back into biochemistry and functional medicine and really starting to understand how the body operates from that biochemistry level. And, through my healing journey, what I've realized, especially with autoimmunity, is that there are more layers. It's not about the organ or system that is affected by your autoimmune disease. It has more to do with the immune system and what is affecting the immune system. And because of that, there's almost always what I call stealth infection, some kind of hidden infection that is involved in the expression of these autoimmune diseases. And that has led me down the path of investigating the many, many layers in myself and all the clients that I work with now. And recently, I started to separate some of the symptoms. So I had symptoms that lingered, even though my Hashimoto's was in remission. I still had these symptoms that lingered, and I started to investigate what could be causing that. Got convinced it was infectious disease in nature, found a doctor to start doing some testing, and he really had a strong feeling that this could be Lyme. And I was like, no way, I don't have the Lyme symptoms. I know my friend Heather. I'm nothing like Heather.
yeah.
Sorry to throw you in the mix
Okay.
there. But
Yeah.
I mean, it's like I didn't have the classic Lyme symptoms, right? And I was like, all right, whatever, test for Lyme. And sure enough, I'm positive on 3 different testing methodologies for Lyme, Bartonella, EBV, all sorts of these different types of infections. And so that's kind of what led you and I to starting to get really close in this part of our journey, is the Lyme connection and how different it can be for each person, and also how it just takes a little bit of that. Keep uncovering each one, keep looking, because if you're not feeling good, there's something there, right? So that's kind of how we started having these conversations.
Yeah, thanks for like pulling it all together, and I just love it that you're further down the path with understanding the body and doing the studies in the functional medicine and the functional nutrition, and I'm just so grateful. So I'm not grateful that you're not well. However, I am grateful that we have each other, because I know together
Absolutely.
we are going to get this figured out, and along the way we're gonna keep sharing. So one of the things that I find to be really interesting in what you just said, and I want to bring this up because so many people feel like crap, and they essentially have what you might call a mysterious illness, and likely a lot of their friends, families, potentially even doctors have told them that they're fine, and this may potentially be all in their head. And I just feel like that is one of the most cruel things you could ever suggest to anyone. If someone is telling you that they don't feel well, it doesn't matter if they look fine. It's like,
That's right.
listen, 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 listen. I personally am like really questioning if hypochondria even exists, or if that's some sort of barbaric sort of title that we've put on people, the way that we used to claim that, in the early 1900s, women were having hysteria when they were actually having real issues. So can you say a little bit about that, like about that diagnostic piece and what we go through with mysterious illness?
Yeah, and it's definitely an Achilles heel for me too, because I have been told that I look fine on paper with all my lab work, especially when it comes to looking at a specific disease, right? Hashimoto's, for example, you look at the antibodies and the thyroid levels, and if you're fine, you're fine. And that should be the end of it. But it's not for a lot of people. And I think part of our culture too is that we've pulled ourselves so far away from intuition, and we're always seeking some kind of intellectual solution, that we start to ignore that and we start to really doubt ourselves. And then we're like, well, maybe I am fine and maybe I am just crazy. So, okay, give me this Xanax, or give me whatever it happens to be so that I don't feel like I'm going crazy, even though I kind of feel like shit. And I know that something is fundamentally wrong. Yet all these experts are telling me that, oh no, I'm fine. And my big message to my clients and to the people that I meet is that if you fundamentally know that something's not right, keep digging. Right. It just means they're doing the wrong tests.
Right.
It's there. They're just doing the wrong tests, right? And if you don't get anywhere, fire that person, find somebody else. I can't tell you the number of practitioners I've fired over the years. Everybody has their, reaches of knowledge, right? And sometimes we get that way with the practitioners, like we've explored everything that practitioner knows. It's okay that they don't know it all. They can't possibly know it all, so it's okay to shift and keep searching. But bottom line, we're going to be the advocate for ourselves. Nobody else is going to tell us when we're fine except us, right?
Right. And
yeah.
I think that's this whole point of like, turn in, listen. You are your own best medicine. That doesn't mean don't go to the doctor. That means follow your intuition.
Absolutely.
Your intuition is your best doctor. And, I have friends who are in the allopathic medical model. I used to work in critical care pharmaceuticals. I worked with neurosurgeons and heart surgeons and ER doctors and all of the amazing people who are working so hard to learn how to save our lives. And, in the private moments together when we would have dinner, I had many of them, even just these, like, just brainiac neurosurgeons admit to me, we don't really know.
Right.
We are on the search. Okay. Every single case, when I would sit in grand rounds, I would have that experience where I would witness these most brilliant minds who are saving lives every single day, cutting people open, cutting skulls open, operating on brains. And when you're in grand rounds with them, you realize they are learning every single case. So our diagnostic tests are being informed by our experience. It's not the other way around. I think that's one of the big things that's changing in the way that we truly heal. And so that feels like a core pillar for our conversation. And so then the other piece is like, if we fully accept that we are our own best medicine and that our intuition is essentially the doctor, then we become the investigator.
Yes.
And, I think like, and this is one of the things that's been happening, as for the last for a long time for me, but for the last several weeks, I've been on this investigation of like, when I remove all these foods and I essentially go onto a fast, how is my body reacting? And when you pare everything down to a limited number of foods, you can start to determine what reaction you're having to which foods. And Torea has fielded a lot of frustration and cussing from me.
Just a little.
I'm like a serious rebel inside that loves burritos and quesadillas. So having to like go down to bone broth and like still having all these itching reactions and stuff in my body has been a very interesting process, but you've been an incredible guide for me. And so I'd love for you to give a little bit of wisdom about how you approach this understanding how to use food as medicine relationship.
The first thing I guess I would say is, while it's good to get information from the internet and the interwebs, take it all with a grain of salt, right? Because when we start to go down this path of elimination diets, there's a lot of diet dogma. There's a lot of you must not be doing it right, or you must not be doing it well enough. And just throw all that shit out the window, because bottom line, what you're really trying to do is you're really trying to do what Heather's doing, which is learn about how your body is reacting to certain things. And if food is possibly a nurturing food for you or an inflammatory food for you. And we go through so many phases in our life where some foods will be inflammatory to us. And then later on, as we've healed a little bit more or a little bit differently, that food may not be inflammatory to us any longer. So I think it's just my first caution is don't get caught up in a black and white yes, no list. Like everything is get really curious about it and see what it's telling you about your body right now. And so for you, with the itching and the hives and the stuff that has been coming forward, that's all starting to show you a commonality across these different seemingly unrelated foods. Like, what does lemon and bone broth have to do with each other, right? But actually what you're discovering is that no, that cross section happens to be histamine. Well, that's telling you a really important thing about your immune system, and that it's got this mast cell reaction, which is reacting to histamine, right? So you're putting these two clues together. And so I guess bottom line, what I'm trying to say is that really get curious when you start experimenting with food. Try and figure out, what is it trying to tell me? A lot of times we get stuck in this trap of like, oh my God, I can't eat that. Or, oh my God, that's going to make me have a flare. And then we become fearful of food. And that's a whole different fight or flight, parasympathetic, sympathetic nervous system activation that we don't really want to be in, and certainly isn't helping our body heal.
I remember one time you said to me something like, well, I really just don't want you to be, seeing a tomato as like your ultimate death or something like that, like, oh my God, there's a tomato.
Don't fear the tomato. Like, holy moly. But I get that all the time. I get clients who come to me like, I can't eat nightshades. I'm terrified of eating nightshades. And that tells me that they're sending this message to their body that they're terrified of feeding it. And that, I think that kind of stress and that kind of message that we send to our body can be more damaging than the tomato itself, right? And so when you really start to compare that mindset that we can get ourselves stuck in, especially when reading a lot of yes, no lists, do this, don't do that, people are trying to intellectually tell us how to eat, and really what we need to be doing is trying to figure out, what does this body need for me right now?
I just felt my body relax. Like, yes, I just want you to hear me. I just want you to know what I need. It's just like, it's so simple. How do we miss this? This needs to be trained. I'm like, oh, I should have just known this from the time I was a little child. But unfortunately,
forgot.
I forgot, but I was also trained like food meant weight gain. I've always been
because our culture starts to put in all these different layers around, the body image, and what does that mean for weight and not weight. And then we start to, later on explore, well, gosh, maybe I should be vegetarian or vegan. And then that's another yes, no list. Or no, maybe I should do paleo. Oh, that's another yes, no list, right? And so people start to tell us what we should be doing. And that's when we come out of our heart and into our head every single time, right? When we're starting to reach for that intellectual knowing that takes us out of our heart, and intuition happens in the heart. So we all knew this as babies. We all knew this as children. But we forget, because we get all those intellectual layers put on top of it all.
Yeah. Wow. So basically, when we start to feel fearful of food, it's like, spend some time to come back into the heart. So it's the tuning back in. And even if you do feel angry because you feel limited, or you can't eat something, realize that it's not about not being able to. It's about like, this is what I'm working on right now. I have to really work on this, is like, oh, this is my cherished baby. This is my pristine chapel. I don't want to pour acid all over the floor. It's not that I can't, it's that I don't want to. And something dawned on me when you were talking about the relationship with the body, of like, it's like any relationship. I mean, if you have a lover who's not meeting you in your heart, you start to feel hungry, and there's a disconnect, and there starts to be discord, right? And that might come out in bitching and, just whatever, you start projecting, you're bickering, and then you're just going further and further and further away from each other. And I'm like, oh, that's what's been happening with my body. And so there's a real invitation here. There's a real invitation for sure. So let's talk about our unique situation, because we're both working with Lyme, which I'm Learning more and more is like really just sort of an acronym umbrella for a complex, if you have it in your nervous system, it's essentially a complex neuroimmunological disease, which means there's a cluster of bacterias and viruses and funguses that are all communicating with each other and creating an intraweb of communication, pathogenic intraweb of communication within the body. For me, it's embedded in the spine and the brain, and we know that because of the way the inflammatory episodes show up. Some people have it in their joints. There's different stages.
Yeah.
And that's interesting because I've had people say to me, I had a friend say, well, I know so-and-so has Lyme and so-and-so has Lyme, and they just take Chinese herbs and they're fine. They're not doing anything that you're doing, which is another like really hard. Please don't say that to your friends. It's really hard because then again, you start to feel like you're doing something wrong. And
Yeah.
then you're being told you look fine and someone else has it and they seem fine. And all of that is just more of this onslaught of disconnect from ourselves and our intuition and our own medicine. Um, but I think I would love, like you were really recently I did the adrenal recode diet with Krista Orecchio, and I absolutely love her and I love that diet. And that actually prepared me to be able to do what I'm doing now because we did so much deep listening. I feel
Yeah.
like that's one of the beautiful things about that program. A lot of beautiful things about that program, but her number one message is body trumps protocol, similar to your
Yeah.
message.
Yeah.
And by constantly taking my pulse and my temperature and recording foods and then, really tuning in and then being in a group setting, I started tuning in even more. And that's what led me here. And I learned that, oh, adrenal recode is for when I get a little stronger. Right now I'm back to, I need to be looking at my gut health and reactivities and this whole thing around histamine mast cell activation illuminated. Can you talk a little bit about that? Like these programs that seem to work for everyone, but when you have this Lyme amorphous thing happening, something else happens. You had a great explanation for it.
Yeah. Yeah. So I kind of think of it as, a lot of the programs that are available, Christina's programs, AIP, for example, there's a lot of these programs that are developed with good intentions in mind. And they're really trying to, if you think of it as a bell curve, right? They're really trying to get the bulk of people that it can help. And for some people are outliers. They're on the ends over here. It's less numbers of people, but they're the outliers. And typically when we're dealing with really complex illnesses and chronic illnesses, sometimes that ends us up on the outlier ends, right? So this program, while it may be well and good for you at some point in the future, may not have worked so well for you because you've got all these other layers going on. Like the other night when you and I were talking, it's like we can count on our hands of like, okay, I've got Borrelia and I've Bartonella and Mycoplasma and ED. Like that complement, mine, is different than yours, which means
Right.
that my reaction to things are going to be different than your reaction to things. So this is where I guess to answer your question, this is where the body is unique. This is where every single person is unique. And not always is it going to be about reading about some supplement that helps somebody else that it's going to help us. If it doesn't work for you, that just means that you haven't figured out your unique combination yet.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, which I feel like in a lot of ways, and I think a lot of us who are going through this Lyme experience, this Lyme awakening that's happening on the planet right now, I'm hearing and feeling that it's almost it's pushing us, it's driving us into customized medicine. Like
Absolutely.
because there's no two Lyme cases alike. There's 100 different variations of just the Borrelia, which is only one of the bacterias that commingles with like this
Right.
whole list of other bacterias. And like you said, it depends on which bacterias it's entangled with and which ones are active at what time, how your body's going to react, which is why sometimes I'll be totally fine. And then sometimes it will switch within 5 minutes. Sometimes it'll switch within an hour. I can just be like deathly ill. And then sometimes certain foods are fine for me and other times they're causing these huge reactions, and it has to do with which of the what we call them co-infections is active in the moment. So
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, it's pretty crazy making. So but this is where we are being forced into customized medicine, and we are also being forced to turn within, like because our greatest tool when you're dealing with this level of complexity is our intuition, like you said.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah. And the customized medicine piece is a long time coming.
yeah.
Like we've needed this for a very long time. It's not one pill for every ill. Like it doesn't really work that way. If we think about it, we're part of this giant ecosystem on this planet, and the co-infections are part of that giant ecosystem too, right? And so it's a very, very complex, like even mathematicians can't map out the ecosystem in a mathematical equation. It's
Wow.
that complex, right? So I mean, we can do bits and pieces for sure, but
Hmm.
it's a bit and a piece, it's not the whole. And so for us to expect that we're going to be able to put something right in there and be able to solve it is a little bit overstating and
Hmm.
oversimplifying the picture. And I think for those of us who are dealing with this kind of complex illness, that that is part of where the frustration lies, is that it feels like, oh, I should be able to be like my friend who's taking the Chinese herbs and not having a problem,
Yeah.
right? But then again, it's like, okay, I've tried the Chinese herbs, now I have to try the Beyond Balance stuff, or I have to try whatever it happens to be. And I'm just so thankful that you and I have been able to find practitioners at this one clinic in Marin who are willing to change the course based off of how we're presenting at the time.
Yeah.
And that's been my experience. And I know that's been your experience with Dr. Beth. And I think that's very critical in this case of personalized medicine, that it doesn't necessarily mean that we have to follow a prescribed protocol for a period of time. If the body's rejecting it partway through, it's time to change
Switch.
gears.
Yep.
Yeah.
Radically change gears,
Yeah.
and that's where I think it's like, God, I see Beth as like my resident healing partner, and like she's the guide, like she's the captain of the boat. But like when we meet, it's our two intuitions and our two intellects talk.
Yeah.
Like we're
Yeah.
all there, and she
Yeah.
listens to me just as much as I listen to her, and we're just in it, listening, making whatever shifts are necessary. And in terms of up leveling, everything's up leveling at the clinic. I haven't even had a chance to tell you this, but she's just brought in a practitioner who's been living in Israel studying live blood cell analysis, and I got to meet him on my last time in the clinic last week. And um, the things that he was explaining to me about what we're learning about the way that these pathogens communicate with each other, and how the pathogenic communication has changed within the last 5 years, and they're literally seeing it
Yes.
in the blood. So,
Yes.
and a lot of times people, this whole mysterious illness, your test is negative, you're really fine thing, it's like now we can see in the blood that that's not true. But if you don't know how to read the blood and you don't have the right diagnostic test, then you're not going to be able to see that. And the sad part about that is then if someone just keeps trying to push on to keep pushing on, and ignoring it, is that all that's happening is this intraweb of pathogens is growing into your system and getting stronger and stronger and stronger until you will become incapacitated, as I did. Um, and and so I'd like, my hope is that we can help people before they
Yeah.
let it get that far. And secondly, what's really interesting to me is he said, 5+ years ago, when he was looking in people's blood and reading blood, the different pathogens were not communicating with each other. They would pretty much stay in their own camp, a lot of times in their own biofilms. Like if you were going to treat candida, you could just treat candida. If you're going to treat borrelia, you could just treat borrelia. But now they're commingling, and they're creating, like I said, a web of communication, and they're basically able to fire off in one part of the body and signal a flare up on the complete other end of the body, and a train all the way in between. So he said it's completely changed the game, for those who are trying to figure out what to do about these complex neuroimmunological illnesses. This is the level that they're looking at. And
Yeah.
it's
They have to.
fascinating. They have to, so it's like, sure, ice baths, okay, that helps, but it doesn't help all the time. And when you have neuro Lyme, and if you're destabilized to a point with your nervous system, the ice bath can actually make things worse. So I'm bringing these things up just to be, we have customized medicine. Let's also have customized compassion, and begin to understand when we're making suggestions, because we want to help to our friends, that that we don't really know. The most brilliant minds on the
Oh,
planet
nobody
don't
does. Yeah,
really know.
nobody knows.
No one's
Yeah.
curing themselves from Lyme right now. No, that's not happening. Some people are getting relief from symptoms, and sometimes that relief from symptoms can last for a while. But if the flare up happens again, by then this interweb of connectivity of the pathogens very likely can have become stronger during that time that you thought that you were fine, or that you were. So that's why I'm like fierce, and there is nothing else in my life. I'm in the clinic. There's no other, well, plus my body won't let me do
Yeah.
anything else. The second I get a little too far, I get into a flare up and I go down. But so what do you have, what are your reflections on that? Because I know you're having very much a similar experience right now. You're able to keep working. You're at a little bit different stage. You have different co-infections.
Yeah. So, I think so. First of all, I'm fascinated that he started to work in the clinic. I'm aware of his work anyway, and the fact that he's working in the clinic makes me even happier.
Yeah.
But I think the more we learn about how these organisms are working together in their own ecosystem, plus taking advantage of the host body, right? We're the host body.
Mm.
It's no different than a tick on a mouse. The mouse is the host body. The tick is hanging out on top of the mouse. It's really no different. We see these kinds of repeated patterns over and over. But I think it's really interesting to understand that, because when somebody comes across, and maybe this will just help all of the people who get to watch this video, but when somebody comes across and says, oh, you should try this, they're only coming from an intention of wanting to help, right? And even though that might be a good piece of advice, a bad piece of advice, it really doesn't matter, right? It's that same kind of thing as with food. It's approaching it with curiosity. Because when we approach it with curiosity, it's like, oh, I wonder if an ice bath would work for me. I don't know. I don't know if I would try it. It's one of those things of like, huh, and really start to approach it with curiosity, because then I mean, here's why I love curiosity so much. There's no space for judgment.
Right.
Nobody can be judged, right?
Yep.
So if you're curious about it, then you can start to incorporate that, and then you can start to ask your heart and get into the intuition piece of it. And that's where you can combine it and get really good information. Because if you can be quiet, be curious, ask your heart, and really pay attention to whether or not that's causing you to expand or contract, then that's your answer. Right? And all of these things might work at different times. So for you, ice baths might be working for you right now, but they might not. It might have to go to the complete opposite, right? It might have to be infrared sauna instead. And for me, it could be the same way, and it could flip itself on its head. What that means is that all of these different things start to become part of that toolbox from which we can ask our heart and get that answer from the intuition if we're developing that intuition. And that's how our body can guide us through this healing, right? It's if we approach all of those things as tools in the infinite toolbox.
Thank you so much for that. And you essentially just defined the radiant healing mandala that I talk about a lot. It's no one thing, when we are on a path to our true and radiant health, we are essentially coming into mastery of love with our own self, with our own listening, and with the tools that are being presented to us. Because it's not about the tools, it's about the listening.
Yes.
And that's something that I've learned it's been interesting. It's been sometimes really, really hard, because I'll think something's working and it is working. But when I get too caught up with it's supposed to work and it is working, or it has worked in the past, so then I'm going to keep pushing myself, even though it's becoming more and more uncomfortable, I've gotten some serious, universe bitch slaps through my body. And like with the ice thing itself, it's like it worked and worked and worked and worked, cryo bath. And then it was just like backlash, massive inflammation, massive, just like, I was just like, whoa, okay, I just got completely spun. So, and that's something also that people that are healing from this and learning how to work with these complex, more complex diseases is sometimes we feel like we can't tolerate anything. And sometimes that's true. Sometimes what you need the most is just the stillness. Like right now, it's like I did the adrenal recode, which brought all these foods back into my life, which at first was amazing. And then now I'm going to the polar opposite, but I'm not, it's fluid. It's the fluid dance.
It is fluid. Yeah.
Because
And
one
it
serves the
always
other.
is. And it always is, and it always will be. And I think that is, we get, especially in the Western world, we get so caught up in it's black or white, or it's a yes or a no. It's this polar opposite, like it's clear cut. It's biology's never been clear cut, ever. And that was one of the things that, interestingly enough, kind of turned me off to it in a way when I was going through college, is that the more you started to hone in on something and try and get an answer, the muddier the waters became. And it felt like there wasn't any clear-cut answer. And that is, I think, what we try and expect of ourselves, is like, oh, this is working for me, therefore I will be able to continue this through the future. And then all of a sudden it doesn't. Well, it doesn't, because it's all fluid, right? These ecosystems are all fluid and dynamic. And that's what is the big lesson for me, is learning how to dance with it all.
Yeah. Well, and that's the awakening. That's the embodied awakening that is happening, because essentially that's what we're being brought back to our true nature. And our true nature is a fluid nature. It is the feminine, the lunar, which, these complex disease states, like, they teach you how to be lunar. It's be lunar or
Absolutely.
be punished. So I know that we're going to wrap up in the next few minutes, and there's a couple of things I want to cover before we do. One is a really powerful reminder you gave me the other night, which was, if you have mold, mycotoxin overload in your system, which is one of the complexities that I have, and I think you have too, you need to be sweating every single day. And it's like, I've known this in the past, but I somehow got off of it, and I definitely had to pay for that one. So thanks for bringing me back to, now I'm back to my skin brushing. Got my skin brush right here.
Yay. Good.
Skin brushing.
Good.
And then even like, sort of fascia tapping helps a lot. And then skin brushing is pretty benign. I think that's pretty much an all the time thing. You want to be careful with your tenderness of like how much you're sort of pounding on yourself, and tapping. I'm doing fascia scrubbing as I get out of the sauna. So sweaty, hot, warm fascia, and scrubbing it, because we have to get the mycotoxins out of the, explain a little bit about why we're doing these practices. And before you do that, this is the ultra binder that I'm
one
taking.
of my faves.
Okay.
One of my faves.
Give us the download.
So, with mycotoxins, part of the reason why it's so important that we're sweating and activating sweating, really what we're doing is we're activating one of our primary detox pathways, which is through the skin and sweating, right? There's other pathways. There's breathing is a very powerful detox pathway. GI system, also detox pathway, but the sweating piece is super important, primarily because the body doesn't quite always know what to do with mycotoxins. So it kind of is like this like mischievous like kid that's like, I don't know what to do with it. I'm just going to pack it up here in a little lipid molecule and shove it under the rug and we're good, right? And so it packs it into fat tissue. And so, if you're out of your moldy environment, yet you're still feeling like you've got like mold symptoms, testing is one really good way to know. But also, if you start sweating and start actually recirculating those fat molecules in the body, then that stuff gets released. And so doing the sweating, following it up with a binder like what you just showed, is a really good idea.
I'm also fascia blasting.
And you're doing the fascia. Yeah, exactly. So, that is releasing everything. And part of it too is activating heat shock proteins. That's part of the sweating piece of it, of which cryotherapy and ice therapy does the same thing, but through cold. So all of those different methods can help with the same kind of thing, but it helps the body get rid of these mycotoxins, even if you're no longer in an environment that is actually producing the mycotoxin to begin with.
Right. And then I'm
mold
doing
is a big one.
Yeah, it is, Jesus, it's so, and
Yeah.
it's big because what happens too is these toxins, they basically, and plus all the other clusters of the other pathogens we talked about, they shed. So that's part of the cyclical nature of us getting sick. If our detox pathways aren't open, or we have a certain gene mutation that makes our detox pathways less open, we can't clear what other people might be able to clear who may be having an easier time with their Lyme. So basically, we have to just realize like we're sort of getting flooded with additional toxins, which then affect the brain. So if you're following me more closely on Instagram, especially at Network of Love, you can see all my brain training that I'm doing. I've literally been rehabilitating my brain and bringing it back online because the overload of neurotoxicity causing all the neuroinflammatory issues was shutting down my brain quite literally.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's a really important piece. The other important piece is colonics. I just came from a colonic, and then right after a colonic, I do a coffee enema, and you have to use a specific type of coffee. I use like a green coffee that's Gerson approved, that's mold free, tested, all,
Yeah.
all these things. You have to use a certain concoction. And I just find like if I don't do those things, I can't get out of bed. And sometimes even when I do those things, I can't get out of bed. Are you doing the colonics and the coffee enemas?
I'll do the coffee enemas every now and then, but I'm also doing rectal insufflation of ozone.
Right.
As part of the Lyme treatment. Ozone is a big part of it for me. And
Yeah.
so rectal insufflation as well as ozone sauna.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been doing some ozone IV therapies like you, but for me, it's mostly been the sauna and the rectal insufflation. So, and that for me makes my body react the same way as a coffee enema, right? So it
Oh,
helps
okay.
just get all of that stuff out. Yeah.
Right. I need to get my ozone machine, which we can get ozone machines for everyone who's listening through our network of love. One of our compassion ambassadors is a distributor and is offering, like at cost for us.
Nice.
So definitely check that out on the directory. It's under activated wellness. So, okay. So then lastly, now we want to rehabilitate the gut,
Yes.
right?
Okay, good. So let's talk about this prebiotic. So part of gut rehabilitation means that what we are doing is we're supporting the colonies or the communities, of, if you will, of um, the commensal, not pathogenic, but the commensal bacteria, right? So
Okay.
the friendly guys. We want to build the friendly guys, and we want to build specific species that are known to be associated with very healthy human individuals,
Mhm.
things like Archimantia and those kinds of things. That's done with something called a prebiotic. Now, a prebiotic is the scientific term for food for the probiotic, right? Food
Mhm.
for the bacteria, food for those guys. And a lot of times it has to do with starchy vegetables or different types of starches. That's what gets broken down into the food for the bacteria. Now, a lot of people with food sensitivities can't run out and go eat a parsnip, for
Mhm.
example, or they can't eat a potato. God forbid, I just said a nightshade.
I know.
Just kidding. So, just kidding. So, it's like, it's hard to do it with food if you're having a lot of food sensitivities. So what you can do is you can use a prebiotic powder, which has all these starches that are already in a water soluble form, that you can really fine tune the dose, because part of the food sensitivity reaction has to do with the dose. That one bite of sweet potato may have been too high of a dose. And so what you have in that jar is powder.
Mhm.
And so, starting super slow. And when I say starting super slow, I mean a pinch, a few grains,
Wow.
right? Yeah, super, super slow. Because what we don't want is we don't want your body to get thrown into this huge reaction, causing a lot of gas or causing a lot of bloating or causing a histamine mast cell reaction. That's what we don't want.
Mhm.
What we do want is we want the body to be exposed to a little bit of it. We want those bacteria to be like, oh, hey, food, this is cool,
Mhm.
and start to really slowly grow those good populations. And so everybody, again, it's a very fluid dynamic, but
Mhm.
everybody's going to be different. So your pace at which you can move that dose up is going to really depend on what's going on for you and also your microbiome map and the whole bit. But start with a little pinch.
Okay.
Give yourself a few days, then start with a little bit more, and then just keep pushing it a little bit. Know that when you push it, you might get a reaction that might say, okay, Heather, a little bit too much. So just back it off a little bit and go back to the lower dose.
Okay.
Stay there for a little while, then try and move it up. It, again, approach it with curiosity.
And
I
listen
wonder
closely.
if 3 grains is going to be too much today. Let's see. Or I wonder if 3 grains is going to be just right. You know, those kinds of things. So just really slowly take your time, but that is part of rebuilding a gut, is by feeding the good guys and helping the good guys grow bigger colonies to kind of push out the pathogenic species that may be in the microbiome and may be present. So it's a different approach than just killing everything off and then throwing a bunch of probiotics in there that may or may not take residence. So it's a different approach, and it's used by a lot of people who deal with SIBO on a regular basis. They find that, you know, doing a bunch of antibiotics doesn't really help the subset of clients that are hanging out on the ends of that bell curve, right? So this is that approach that they use with other clients who may or may not be able to do that way. So yeah,
because even like I was getting massive, you know, episodes off of just trying different probiotics at one point about a year and a half ago. So so the Ultra Binder, for everyone watching, this can be found via the Emerson link, which all of the members of the Network of Love have access to your own account with 30% discount, which is great because this is not cheap. And then the Mega Prebiotic, if they want to get it, they need to work with you, right, Torea? So how can people, because are you still taking clients? Because I know you need to be easeful because you're also doing treatment.
Yeah, so I am taking clients. I work in a different way. So I work in a hybrid group and private program.
Okay.
But I'm willing to talk with anybody. So, you know, if anybody in the network wants somebody to talk to and needs at least a conversation of just give me my next step, I'm happy to talk with people free of charge. Like that's something that I do with a lot of people. And if it feels right for both of us that they want to work with me in that way, then absolutely I'll invite them in. But sometimes it's, you know, it's like you finding Dr. Beth and me finding Dr. Sinatra. It's like sometimes that fit isn't 100% perfect. So, but at least I can get them started and pointed in the right direction.
Great. So I'll put your contact info in the directory, and we'll say that for members of the network, they can have like a 10-15 minute consultation, and then from there you can decide, and then they can get if it's the right fit, then they can get a prescription for the Mega Prebiotic from you and that sort of thing. So okay, absolutely. Well, I know you have to go, and I also know we could talk forever. So this is just the beginning.
We'll do another.
Yeah, we'll do another. We'll keep going because we're learning so much together. So thank you so much, and thank you. And I just look forward to the unfolding. Okay, I love you. More soon.
Love you.
Okay, bye.